Hello, I hope you are all doing well. Today I have a video for you about M Butterfly by David Henry Hwang. We're just going to talk about Act 1 today. First of all, I think M Butterfly is a really awesome play. I think it's kind of an amazing achievement. I hope you're getting some of that. I do think it's a fun read. We'll get into some of the plot stuff today and in the coming classes. It's kind of a wacky plot. I think the breaking of the fourth wall I think is fun and kind of interesting. There's also a lot of stage direction, which is one of the things that I wanted us to get from what I had us do a couple of classes ago when we watched that short video of that play Endgame, right? Really, what I wanted us to get from that was just the way we have to notice stage direction, the way that you need to imagine all this stuff really happening to get the full effect of the play. So I hope that you're doing that with this play as well. There's a lot of music. Maybe you don't know what it sounds like. I know I put one of the songs up there. You can listen to some of the music though. It's not very good, so I don't know how much you're gonna want to listen to it. But I do think it's important, at least, to imagine the changes in lighting and where people are on the stage and what people are wearing. You really gotta ask yourself these questions and kind of have this all in your mind at the same time to get an enjoyable experience from a play like this, which I think you can get. So let's jump into the play. I want to talk first just a couple of basic things about the plot. And if you do have any questions about the plot, it's a little bit confusing, you can post on that discussion thread that I had up there for last class. So let's get into some of the basic stuff about the play. We have Gallimard, our main character. We see him at the very beginning of the play and back and forth throughout. He's in a jail cell in 1988, which is the present when the play was written. So we have time when he's in a jail cell, and then we have these periodic flashbacks, mostly to the 1960s when he's working as a diplomat in China. So it's important to be aware of those two different timelines: 1988 in the present, where Gallimard's in jail, and back in the 60s when he's living in China. Other than that, we also have his wife, Helga, who he doesn't seem to like very much, who's kind of sucks, honestly. She's pretty boring. We also have his friend Mark, who I hate. I cannot stand Mark. I think he's the worst. And we'll talk about this, but most of his characteristics kind of set him up as this, like, manly man sort of character. And we'll get into the significance of that for the play. So his friend Mark, Song, right? The Asian woman that he meets when he's in China, when he goes to the opera, she's one of the actors. Obviously, she's going to be a really important character. And yeah, let's just keep it at that for now. So Act 1 starts with Gallimard in his jail cell, and very quickly he gets into the plot of Madame Butterfly, the other play that I gave you some stuff about last class. Right, Madame Butterfly, this play from 1904, written by Giacomo Puccini. It was one of these, fancy operas, sung in Italian, written by an Italian. And M Butterfly is kind of really intimately connected to Madame Butterfly, and we see that right away when Gallimard starts telling us about the plot of it. So he, right from the beginning, kind of sees everything that's happening to him in terms of this old play, Madame Butterfly. He tells us it was his favorite play, so it's definitely something he's seen a lot of times, definitely something he's thought about, something that's maybe affecting him. So I want to look a little bit at the significance of this old play, this old opera, Madame Butterfly, on Act 1 of M Butterfly. And as we talk about this, I want us to have in the back of our mind, like, what is the significance of doing this? Why would David Henry Hwang, writing in 1988, make so much reference to this old opera? What's the point of doing it? What does it do for you as a reader? What does it add to the play that he's doing this? Because it's a weird thing to do, right? It kind of sticks out. Like, why would you be always connecting to this other thing that's 80 years old? Why should audiences follow that? Why should I learn the plot of Madame Butterfly? What is the plot of Madame Butterfly going to help me see about M Butterfly? So let's have that in mind as we take a look here. Starting on page 10, Gallimard starts to make the connection between what's happening in his own life and the action of Madame Butterfly. So the way that he does this is by telling us, is by casting in the role of Pinkerton, right, who is the Navy officer, who's the one who ends up marrying Butterfly in the old play, who treats her terribly, really just an awful person all around, right? So that is how Gallimard sees himself right now. And then in the role of Butterfly, we have Song. You know, for obvious reasons, an Asian woman, right? So that's how he sees it. Um, and then as Sharpless, we have his friend Mark. So at first, this kind of makes sense. Gallimard is obviously our main character, just like Pinkerton is kind of the main character of Madame Butterfly. Gallimard is the one, you know, who goes to Asia, who's working there, living there, right? Who then has an affair with a woman there. So that's how we could kind of connect Butterfly to Song. And then Sharpless and Mark, they're both kind of the secondary character, right? They're like the friend of the protagonist. So that's why Gallimard sets it up this way. But I think once we put this under a little more scrutiny, it kind of starts to fall apart. So, what are other things that we know about this character? Pinkerton from the United States. Gallimard, where's he from? France. Butterfly is Japanese in Madame Butterfly. Song, as we learn, is Chinese. So that's a big difference right there. In terms of the way they behave, Pinkerton is they keep using this term cad in the play. It's kind of just like an old fashioned term for you know, these like ladies man or womanizer, and you know, these kind of like manly men's men sort of thing. So they use the term cad for him all the time, right? Is that how Gallimard is? Not really. In fact, at one point, Mark actually, I'm gonna probably look at this page later, but Mark calls him a wimp, right? We also get the scene where Mark is trying to get him to go to this like cabin that he has in the country, and there's gonna be girls there and everything. Gallimard's like, no, I don't want to go. So he's definitely not doesn't fit in with that characteristic of Pinkerton, right? And then Mark, Sharpless in Madame Butterfly is, you know, like a government official. He seems, you know, more responsible, at least like what we see in M Butterfly here, where Sharpless is like, you know, you're married now. Like, what do you mean you're going back to America? You're not going to bring Butterfly back to America with you? So he's the more responsible one, the more moral one, probably, right? Who has a problem with what Pinkerton's doing and the way that he's trying to take advantage, and really just ruining people's lives, right? Eventually, Butterfly kills herself, which is pretty much Pinkerton's fault. So Sharpless is much more responsible. Mark, not so much, right? In fact, Mark is more of like the cad, right, or womanizer, or whatever we want to say, that kind of like hyper masculine role. You might say like the toxic kind of way. So that's really more Mark than it is Gallimard, right? So what we see is that once we start looking at the way that Gallimard has cast his play, it all kind of falls apart. These people really don't fit into the roles that Gallimard is casting here. So then we return to our question, well, why is this play so concerned with Madame Butterfly? Like, what if the characters don't really line up with the characters from Madame Butterfly, then why is this frame being put on the events that are happening? Because once we inspect them even a little bit closely, it all sort of falls apart. So this brings us to some of the things that I have on our assignment sheet, some of the possible topics I have for an essay here. Mainly stereotypes. Uh, there's a lot of stuff going on with stereotypes throughout the play that we'll take a look at. But right here, and we'll watch this throughout the play, but with the frame of Madame Butterfly, how does that contribute to the way Gallimard sees the events that are happening around him? How, and maybe the larger question it's getting to is like, how can art perpetuate stereotypes? How can art make us believe in stereotypes? And what are the consequences of that? If that happens, what are the consequences? One of the discussion threads that I have for you asks about different stereotypes that maybe you've seen in movies or things like that. I think an especially big one is around movies that are about like high school or college, maybe more so even college. If I asked you, well, what are the stereotypes of a college movie? What stereotypes does it employ? What stereotypes does it kind of push or perpetuate? We all know, we're all familiar with this. Movies, uh, you know, tend to show colleges, you know, partying all the time or whatever, just getting drunk constantly or doing crazy things, breaking things, acting irresponsibly, a lot of sexual stuff, right? So the question becomes, like, are those stereotypes real? Are they based in reality? Maybe a little bit, but I don't think entirely. And if they're not totally based in reality, like if that's not the experience that even most people have, then why do they exist? What function do they serve? Why do they continue on? And what are the consequences of having these stereotypes being so prevalent in our culture? So I think that's what Gallimard's experiencing, right? It's old timey, right? But he's old. I guess I'm thinking of his age. He's like 39 in the 60s, so he was born in like the 30s or something. So this is definitely a long time ago. So opera was like the movies for them. So his favorite opera, would be equivalent to a movie that you've seen 10 times, 15 times. So let's keep trying to think about how the action of Madame Butterfly, how the stereotypes that are contained in there affect Gallimard and what they do to him. Because to take it to one step further, once we see these stereotypes, we would ask, well, what are the effects of these stereotypes? What can it do to people? What are the consequences for people? And I think we see some of that to Gallimard, and that's the next topic that I want to talk about. How Gallimard is affected by stereotypes in his life. I think it's one of the other big things that we see in Act 1. Other than the setup with Madame Butterfly in Act 1, we also get all these scenes kind of from Gallimard's childhood. I already referenced the one with Mark when he asks him to go to his house in the country or whatever. Gallimard doesn't want to go. We get the very strange scene, but it's kind of what makes this play interesting. Very strange scene of the girl from the magazines that Gallimard is looking at. We get this story of Gallimard's first sexual experience. So a lot of Act 1 is concerned with his background, and I think it's trying to show us something, or give us some clues or hints or whatever, about how he got to where he is now. So if we think about stereotypes of masculinity, what men are supposed to be like, and a lot of this information, again, comes from art, as well as other places, but I think art's a big one. I think some words that would come to mind are, well, they're supposed to be aggressive or strong or whatever, powerful or tall. Things like this. Be the one to take charge, right? To wear the pants in the relationship. These sorts of things. And I think Mark kind of embodies a lot of these stereotypes, right? But Gallimard really doesn't. For instance, if we look here at page 13, this is right after Gallimard tells Marth, like, no, I don't want to go to your party, your kind of, strange, like, sexual assault party in the woods. I don't really want to be involved in that. That's not my kind of thing. And then we get here, Mark just flat out calling him a wimp, right? So we can see Mark is disparaging of Gallimard, and is basically letting him know, hey, you don't fit into this. Like, you're not like the rest of us. There's something wrong with you, right? So this is where we kind of start to see Gallimard have to deal with not fitting into these stereotypes. And I think we can understand how this would affect Gallimard. Going back to the example I gave with like high school movies or college movies, what happens when you don't fit into those stereotypes? Right? What happens when you go to college and it's not parties and it's a lot of hard work and maybe you don't have that many friends? How do people then feel about themselves? I think we know that this results in insecurity or the question of well, why not? Why don't I fit into this? Why isn't it like that? And I think rationally we know it's because the movies are bullshit, right? And art lies a lot of the time, or it's trying to show us something crazy and wacky or interesting or something like that, and that it shouldn't really be the thing to set our expectations, but it kind of does anyway, whether we really want it to or not. And I think that's something that happens with Gallimard. Gallimard is clearly uncomfortable with the stereotypes around masculinity and what that would require him to do. And honestly, I don't blame him. Right? A lot of the things are kind of dumb or just mean or just wrong. Like part of it explicitly is to treat women poorly, right? And we see him go through this with Butterfly, or sorry, with Song. But that's part of it, is like treat women poorly, and that's the way to handle a relationship. And it's just kind of awful. And I think Mark sets up as a nice contrast of this, right? Because Mark is all of those things, and it just highlights how much Gallimard is not all of those things. And I think we, can imagine how that would affect Gallimard and what he would feel from that. Gallimard even admits on page 11 that he doesn't really fit into being Pinkerton, that Mark doesn't fit into Sharpless. He says, in fact, their roles were usually reversed. So it begs the question, well, if your roles were usually reversed, why are you seeing it this way? One other thing I want to turn to for today is on page 18, where we get a conversation, I think the first conversation between Gallimard and Song. So they're talking about Madame Butterfly. This is right after when Gallimard first sees Song. She is playing the character of Butterfly in Madame Butterfly, singing one of the songs. So talking about that play here, um, Gallimard's so Song calls the plot ridiculous, and then Gallimard says, "I like the story, but what? Oh, you like it? I mean, what I mean is, I've always seen it played by huge women in so much bad makeup. Song, bad makeup is not unique to the West, Gallimard, but who can believe them? And you believe me? Absolutely, you were utterly convincing. It's the first time. I think this is the important part. Convincing, as a Japanese woman, the Japanese use hundreds of our people for medical experiments during the war, you know, but I gather such an irony is lost on you. So just to speak to that point of how Song doesn't really line up with Butterfly, she kind of calls Gallimard out on this. She's like, "You're thinking about me as Butterfly. Butterfly was Japanese. I'm Chinese. We actually, our countries have, a history of war, and we don't like each other very much necessarily. And for you to lump all of that into the same group is just, really kind of fucked up, right? Going on here." Gallimard responds to that, "No, I was about to say it's the first time I've seen the beauty of the story. Really? Of her death, it's a pure sacrifice. He's unworthy, but what can she do? She loves him so much. It's a very beautiful story." Well, yes, to a Westerner. Excuse me? It's one of your favorite fantasies, isn't it? The submissive Oriental woman and the cruel white man. I think the word fantasies is very important here when we're thinking about the role of Madame Butterfly in this play and with just what's going on with Gallimard throughout. Um, well, I didn't quite mean. Consider it this way. What would you say if a blonde homecoming queen fell in love with a short Japanese businessman? He treats her cruelly, then goes home for 3 years, during which time she prays to his picture and turns down a marriage from a young Kennedy. Then, when she learns he has remarried, she kills herself. Now, I believe you would consider this girl to be a deranged idiot, correct? But because it's an Oriental who kills herself for a Westerner, you find it beautiful. Yes, well, I see your point. So I think she gets into something really interesting here. We saw I talked a little bit about this in the notes for the last class, but kind of this critique of the old opera Madame Butterfly. Um, the video that we watched said this a little bit. I tried to talk about it a little bit, but the idea that there's something about the play Madame Butterfly, about this plot of an American naval officer, the way he takes advantage of this girl, and that she ends up killing herself in this kind of like stereotypical like honor killing kind of way. That there's something just deeply wrong with this plot. That it's imperialist is the accusation here, and really that the only reason that this is a play that would get written, that would get made, that would be put on, and that would be hugely popular, because it was at the time, and really, as long as operas were popular, it's still one of the most famous ones. So why would this turn into this story? And Song's basically saying here that it's because of a very stereotypical fantasy created by Europeans that they are big and strong and dominating. It's something interesting here is the way that the stereotypes for masculinity kind of also are the stereotypes that get used for like the West, meaning like Europe and America mostly. That it's big and strong and aggressive and dominating and all that. And then on the flip side, you have women or the East, I guess considered Asia broadly here, that is, submissive and delicate is a word that comes up a number of times that he talks about when he's talking about Song. Submissive and delicate, weak, fragile, small, all kind of the opposite things, right? It's weird how it's total opposites like that. So Song is basically telling Gallimard the only reason this story appeals to you is because it plays on your kind of unconscious desire to be the imperialist in this situation, to be the colonizer. Skipping ahead to page 22, we get a little more on this point. Um, Song says, "We have always held a certain fascination for you Caucasian men, have we not? But that fascination is imperialist, or so you tell me. Do you believe everything I tell you? Yes, it is always imperialist, but sometimes it's also mutual." But that's the line that I think gets here. It is always imperialist. That the fascination for exoticism, or like that the reason that a French man would so kind of desperately desire a Chinese woman, a slender lotus blossom, in his words, right? That the kind of desire there is a desire that's distinctly imperialist, a desire to like go out into foreign lands and capture something that's not yours, right, and claim it as your own. So she's kind of pointing out the similarities between kind of the thought patterns here, the structures of thought, the ways of thinking about it. And she says, yeah, what you're feeling is totally imperialist. That's why you're feeling it. Another big difference between Song and Butterfly is obviously that whereas they describe Butterfly as, submissive and weak, when we meet Song, she's very outspoken, right? She's very upfront, even aggressive in a way, to come up to Gallimard and tell him, like, hey, fucking colonizer, like, what are you doing here? So we'd see that she's not really fitting into that stereotype with the way that she acts either. I want to skip ahead a little bit here, more towards the end of Act 1. This is page 27, um, where Gallimard has come up to Song's apartment, and we see kind of a change in Song here. Um, at the beginning, like we said, she was more aggressive, speaking her mind, being very upfront about things, not fitting into the stereotypes that Gallimard's expecting. And here we see something a little bit different, and I just want to look at a piece of dialogue that always sounds strange to me. So this is page 27. As Song is pouring some tea for Gallimard, she kind of starts freaking out about what she's doing and feeling like it's sort of wrong or something like that. Kind of towards the middle of the page, Gallimard says, "No, you're nervous. Please, hard as I try to be modern, to speak like a man, to hold a Western woman's strong face up to my own, in the end, I fail. A small, frightened heart beats too quickly and gives me away. Monsieur Gallimard, I'm a Chinese girl. I've never invited a man up to my flat before. The forwardness of my actions makes my skin burn." So we see here Song explicitly mention a lot of the stereotypes that been talking about. She mentions, both the West, and she mentions she's been trying to speak like a man. She's been trying to be Western, is what she's saying essentially. Really kind of acknowledging the stereotypes that we were talking about. And then this sentence always sticks out to me as strange. It always rings, I don't know, a little false in my ear. A small, frightened heart beats too quickly and gives me away. I don't know if you would see my notes next to it, but I wrote "really" with a question mark next to that one because I think I don't know, it's just kind of so melodramatic, like so kind of cliche. And I think we've seen songs so far to be like more quick-witted, more sharp-tongued than that, than to rely on such a kind of lame thing to say. A small, frightened heart beats too quickly and gives me away. It's like, like the worst soap opera fodder you could imagine, like you throw away dialogue from Days of Our Lives or something like that. So it just kind of sounds kind of strange to me hearing that line. I want to mark that for later. And then on the next page, page 28, we get Song calling Gallimard a cad. This word, right? That's kind of a stand-in for like stereotypical manliness. So by the end of Act One, we do kind of see them starting to fit more into those roles, right? I talked already about how the way of thinking about it, where Pinkerton is similar to Gallimard, Butterfly to Song, Sharpless to Mark, that there's a lot of problems with this, doesn't make a lot of sense. But by the end of Act 1, we do see Gallimard starting to be more of that aggressive, the cad, right? That's what how they describe Pinkerton. And Song being more weak, fragile, afraid, scared, these sorts of things. So it's kind of fitting it, but there's still some crucial differences where I don't think it totally fits. So that's kind of where we leave it at Act One. In terms of like our essay and how I'm trying to frame this with the stereotypes, we see Gallimard be affected by them. We see him not fit into the stereotypes. Now we see him start to fit into the stereotypes. He seems to really like it, right? He says he's discovering the power of being a man, which is kind of horrifying when you think about it. Like the line where he says, like, "Oh, and I finally realized God must be a man." It's really some kind of terrifying stuff, but it's giving us the experience of what for him it feels like to go from not fitting into the stereotype to now fitting into the stereotype. So let's keep in mind these questions of how are stereotypes harmful, what are the consequences of them, what happens to people who believe in them, what happens when you don't fit into them, all these things, and we'll kind of trace that going forward. So I think that's it for now. I will have another video for you on M Butterfly coming up soon, and please send me any questions, and I'll talk to you later.